We are building out this meal for you, and so next week we're going to be showing you the protein for this meal, which is scallops, grilled scallops, one of the best things you can make. But today we're showing you a side for this meal, which is risotto. And you guys, if you haven't had risotto, it is worth every ounce of time that it requires. You're looking at 20 to 40 minutes to finish this in just a few ingredients. So let me just walk you through those ingredients so you know. You're going to need chicken broth. We're going to be using this homemade chicken broth that we had done back, gosh, it was probably when Ray was here teaching us how to make matzo ball soup. And so we have some fresh chicken stock, and you can use, any kind that you want. You certainly don't have to make it homemade. But you'll need 5 cups of chicken broth, and then you'll just need 1 stick of butter, and then we're going to be using an onion, and you'll only need about 1.5 cups, and so it should be a fairly large onion. And then you're going to need arborio rice, and what's different about arborio rice, it's a little bit thicker and longer than your traditional rice. That piece for this recipe is super important. You can't use regular white rice. It will not work the same. So be sure that it's arborio rice. And then you're gonna need some white wine, some Parmesan cheese, and then some parsley, and that's it. So like I said, if you've never had risotto before, this is a must try recipe. We typically make risotto around the holidays where we have more time at home and can just take our time in making this dish. I wouldn't say it's a perfect weeknight dish, only because you have to stand at the stove for a few minutes. So just keep that in mind when you are making this. I'm going to be using a Dutch oven for this recipe. You just want to make sure you have a heavy pot of some sort that distributes heat pretty evenly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat to medium high, and then take another saucepan. And what you're going to want to do is put 5 cups of chicken broth into the saucepan. So I'm just going to grab my measuring cup. And you may not need all 5 cups. And this is our chicken stock here. So we have 4 cups, and then I'll just add 1 more. So you just want to heat that up so it's ready to go. Okay, so now we have our saucepan with the 5 cups of chicken stock. And then we're going to begin to heat up over medium heat, a Dutch oven or a really heavy stock pot that distributes heat pretty evenly. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut up this onion, and you're just going to finely chop this onion. So I'm just going to cut off the ends the onion. And I am a huge fan on choosing a particular type of onion for this recipe. I don't tend to buy a lot of yellow onions or even red onions because they're really sharp in flavor. I tend to buy sweet Vidalia onions for everything. They're just mild. They're more mild in flavor. And I just find that my kids like it better that way. So it's not quite as potent. So just peel that outer layer of skin off, and I'm going to toss these into my compost. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll split the onion in half. And I know you guys can't see because of this camera angle, but cut it in half and then set the cut side down. And then you're just going to turn it and make slices down the center here. So if it's sitting on your thing this direction, just make long slices. And then all you have to do is turn it the other direction and make them only about like maybe 1/4 of an inch slices, and then turn it the other direction and you will have diced onion. Makes cutting up an onion super easy. And you'll have super tiny little pieces of onion. So that is a great trick when cutting onions up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this stick of butter, and we're going to be using about 2 tablespoons. You can eyeball it. It doesn't have to be 100% exact. So I usually can measure, and I'll put the marks in the top, and then just add those 2 tablespoons to this Dutch oven or your stock pot, and set your butter off to the side. And now we're just going to add our onion into the Dutch oven, and then grab a wooden spoon and just stir this around. Now, one little secret to risotto is make sure you have all your ingredients set out so you can quickly access everything. And you're not going to have to leave the stove because it's one of those recipes you really do have to pay attention. So what I want you to do is grab a ladle and set that off to the side so you have it. And then I want you to grab, you're going to need 1.5 cups to measure out our rice. And so I'm going to go ahead and measure that so it's ready to go while our onions are sauteing. I don't know if you guys know this, but using a little bit of my French background, sauté, do you guys know what that means in French? It means to jump. Kind of a fun little word. There we go. And so we're sauteing these onions down till they're nice and soft. This step is super important. If you try to skip this step, you'll have crunchy onions in your risotto, and you definitely don't want that. So we're going to stir this around. I would guess, you know, a lot of people rush this step, and it's really important that you take your time on this part. We're going to set a timer for 15 minutes. And I know this sounds like a long time. This is not a hard recipe. It just does take some time to be patient. And the patience part is about developing the flavors of this recipe as well as the texture. That's the kind of secret to great risotto, is this creamy, smooth, perfect texture that you just want to fall in love with. And you can also grab 1/2 cup, and we'll need that for our wine. Today, you know, I've chosen a Chardonnay. It's a dry wine, any kind of drier wine. I wouldn't choose a super sweet wine for this recipe. I'm leaning a little bit to the drier side. And you know, I have so many people ask me, well, what brand do you use? I'll tell you this one, and we literally just grabbed something. It wasn't anything in particular. This one is Kendall Jackson Grand Reserve Chardonnay. I didn't choose it for this particular recipe because I change it out every time. But the one secret to using any type of wine in a recipe is taste it first. And so let's go ahead and I'll grab a glass. And I am just going to taste test it. And don't worry if you're making this for kids, the wine is going to cook off. There will be no alcohol in this recipe. And you can give those onions a quick stir. And I'll give this Chardonnay a try. And I love it. It is definitely delicious. If you don't like the taste of it, don't use it in your risotto. That's one of the secrets I want to share with you guys. Your wine needs to taste good to you. If you add wine that you don't like even the taste of, it's not going to make for a great meal. So choose a wine that you love, whatever brand that may be. We're all different, but just make sure it's not too sweet, and choose a little bit of a drier, non-sweet wine that you enjoy, and that added flavor to this risotto is just amazing. I wouldn't skip that step at all. Super important for this recipe. I'll just have a little tiny sip. I always think the second sip helps you decide whether you really like that wine. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself. Okay, so we're going to keep going here, and we have about 12 minutes left. And you guys really know that I like to keep these recipes live. I like to show you how long everything takes from start to finish. I don't like to cut out much of anything, just because this way you get the true feel for the length of this recipe. I don't want there to be any surprises for you. And you've seen that this is a 40-minute recipe. And what's so neat, the smell is wonderful, the butter and the onions together, but you can see them softening up. And I think it's so fun to watch textures change as you're cooking, and you start to learn what it should look like, and you're going to start to see the bottom of your pan browning up really nicely. And you don't have to stand here necessarily for these and stir them all the time, but just give them a stir every now and again. So another thing you can do while you're waiting is grab your Parmesan out of the fridge. I've talked about this with you guys before. Huge fan of using fresh Parmesan versus, the kind that you buy in a can. Just grab a grater. Fresh Parmesan will last you forever. I know it will seem expensive when you buy it at first in a bigger block, but it will last 6 months or sometimes even more. Just keep it sealed really nicely and kept in your fridge. So I'm almost getting down to the bottom of mine here. Grab a plate and then grab a grater of some kind. And you're going to need a whole cup. And what's fun about this recipe is you're not going to use a lot of salt. This is our salt. Parmesan cheese has a great salty flavor to it. And we're just going to grate this up until we have about a cup. And again, if for this particular recipe, please do not use the can. It will not come out the same. I can see on my onions that the bottom of my pan is browning, so just scrape that up, because you guys, a lot of people don't realize the brown bits that form on the bottom of your pan, that's where the flavor is. Super important to scrape up that flavor and get that onto your onions. It makes a huge difference. So just keep grating until we have about a cup. And then I'm not sure if I mentioned it at the start of this, you're going to need some fresh parsley. I happen to have curly leaf parsley on hand. Typically I love flat leaf parsley, but you can use either. And so let me just go back and backtrack for you guys again. So the 5 cups of broth you want to heat to a simmer. So I'm going to turn mine down because it's just started to go into a rolling boil. I'll turn down my heat because we just need it warm. And then you're going to need a stick of butter. And then you're going to need a 1.5 cups of onion and a 1.5 cups of arborio rice. So those measurements, I mean, after a while, because I've made this so much, I don't even need to look at a recipe because it's such a simple recipe to remember. And just keep grating until you get about a cup. And I'll show you right now what that looks like. I'm getting a big pile, but I still have a little bit to go. And my son here is joining me, and my dog. You want to come say hi, Avery?
Sure.
Why don't you tell everyone how much you like risotto? The camera's over there if you like. Yeah, is it one of your favorites?
It's probably up there, yeah.
Yeah. So my son is getting ready to head off to CSU in the fall, so that's super exciting. I'm excited for him. He's gonna give a shot at biology. Thanks, Avery, for coming to say hi. All right, so once you have a cup of Parmesan, you can put this back in the fridge and give those onions a quick stir. And again, if you see any browning on the bottom, be sure and scrape that up. But we don't want it to get too brown, if that makes sense. So turn it down just a little bit if it's starting to brown up too much. Certainly don't want to have it turn black. You don't really want the onions to be turning too brown, but they're starting to get a little bit brown around the edges. And that's going to be your clue that they're getting close to being finished. So let me put this up real quick. Put that back in the fridge. Just tap my grater here on that plate, and I'll put this in the sink. All right, and we've measured out our 1.5 cups of arborio rice. And my onions are looking perfect. They just have a little slight hint of golden brown to them. They smell amazing. This cooking process of taking these 15 minutes to do this, it takes out the sharpness of those onions. And I swear it makes the flavor even sweeter, and it develops that subtle flavor of onion, but it's not too intense, surprisingly. Okay, so we're gonna take our ladle and put it in our chicken broth over here. Get that ready to go. Okay, so now we're gonna take our rice and we're gonna add it into our stock pot or Dutch oven and stir that around for about a minute until everything's nicely coated and mixed with the onions. Okay, so my ladle holds about 1/2 cup. And so I'm going to fill up my ladle, and I'm just going to carefully, you can hear that nice sizzle, add that in, and then I want you to stir fairly quickly. And you're going to see that that liquid gets absorbed just like that. And this is the true secret to risotto. We're going to take our time, and we're going to keep doing this. And so we're stirring it around, and literally all the liquid has been completely absorbed, and that's going to be your clue to go and reach for more chicken broth. So we'll carefully add another 1/2 cup, and you hear that sizzle, and that's a clue to you that it's still nice and hot. And then you're going to stir it around. And if you see any browning on the bottom at all, just go ahead and scrape that up and stir around, and you'll see it literally like magic soak up. And this is really the secret to risotto, is just taking our time, not adding the chicken broth too fast. We want to wait in between enough that it heats back up to temperature, and that liquid will dissolve off fairly quickly. And so when I added the liquid this third time here, I didn't hear it sizzle like I did the first. And so that might have been a clue that there was still some liquid in there. And so go ahead and stir it around until you don't see any liquid, and we'll let it come back to that really super warm temperature. And we'll get that sizzle again, and that liquid will quickly evaporate off. There we go, and we just add a half a cup of this at a time. There we go. And as the temperature changes, you're going to see that you're not going to get that sizzle like we did at the beginning where it's super hot. And you're just going to, this is a very visual recipe, so you're going to want to watch close. I wouldn't even plan on leaving the stove because this can quickly burn if you're not careful. Again, I'm on a medium heat, so we're not cooking it too high. We're letting all that liquid absorb before we add any more liquid. Just stir it around, and you're going to start to see that it's super creamy looking as you stir. And we're just slowly cooking that arborio rice. And as you guys know, with most rice, it takes about 20 minutes for the grains to soften up. So pretty much from the start of when you begin to add that broth, you're looking at about 20 minutes more for this recipe. And I personally, I love to put on music when I'm making risotto, so I can listen to it as I cook at the stove, and I just find it super relaxing. So as soon as you see all that liquid burning off, go ahead and add another half a cup or a ladle full of your chicken broth. Oh, you guys, it smells so good. And toward the end, we're going to be adding this wine. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to measure this out, a half a cup of wine. And that way it's all ready to go. There we go. And just stir that around really nice and evenly. Make sure you get the sides of your pan as well. And just let all that liquid cook off. And you guys are going to be just, I think you'll fall in love with this meal. You'll see that the scallops just take a few minutes. We'll do that in our next share class, so you can see how to put this meal together into just a fantastic gourmet meal that's easier than you could ever think. I think it was Debbie in the beginning asked us for some recipes that you might see in restaurants and you think are too hard at home to make yourself. Well, this is one of those recipes this is like going to a gourmet restaurant, high-end restaurant, and you're making it at home, and your family and friends are going to feel like they are being treated to just the best meal in the world. And it's a really nice one to make for friends just because it doesn't take too long. But the tricky part about risotto is the timing. you want to time this to finish about the same time that you finish up your protein. You don't want it to sit out too long. And so that's really the only trick to risotto for the most part, is just making sure you know your timing. And don't you guys think that that's probably something you learn as you go, as you start to cook and prepare full meals, is the timing of everything can be the trickiest thing to kind of learn and master. It's basically like we're juggling all these different balls at once to make sure that everything's hot and arriving at the table, at just the right amount of time. And truly, that just takes practice. And you'll get better and better as you go. Don't worry if you don't get it. And, if you have to make this first and set it off to stay warm in your oven on a super low heat, you can certainly do that too. And you're just visually again watching. You'll see the liquid bubbling up, and you'll know it's not quite time to add the liquid. And I can just picture Italian grandmothers standing over their stoves making this. If Patty's watching today, I think of you. Anytime I make Italian meals now, that we learned a little bit about your heritage in the first part of our shared classes. That was so fun. And so it's fun to think of people as you cook. All right, so the liquid is out of this batch. So I'm just gonna reach in. And listen, you may not need all 5 cups of your chicken broth either. So typically I set, as I mentioned, we're looking at about 20 minutes. So I usually set my timer with those 20 minutes when I first start this, just to kind of eyeball so I know when to start taste testing to see how cooked the rice is. And so that's another tip, is when you get started with adding the broth, is go ahead and start a timer, and you're probably aiming for about 20 minutes. And while that's stirring, I'm just gonna reach for a spoon. So when I do get ready to taste test, I'll be ready and set for that. And my liquid's boiling up here. And you guys can tell now that I'm talking you through this, is that it's only about 1 to 2 minutes per ladle full that you're stirring to get all that liquid evaporated. And so now we'll go for our next ladleful. Add that in and stir. There we go. Oh, and it just smells, I know I keep saying that, but it smells wonderful. And I really hope that you've found a way to not feel stressed in the kitchen. I know a lot of us want to rush through things, and it's really why I chose this recipe, because it forces you to just slow down and be present. And really, couldn't we all use that in our lives, to be present with one another, to truly sit and listen to what the other person is telling us? And I feel like it's the same kind of relationship with cooking. We're having this rice tell us when it's ready for the next ladleful, so we're really watching and listening and being attentive to it. And you guys, I talk about life lessons all the time in the kitchen. I just think there's so many things we can learn from taking our time in the kitchen and not being in that hurried rush. And I think it makes you enjoy cooking that much more. All right, so our liquid is almost in there, and you might have to tilt your saucepan a little bit as we get a little bit lower. I'm guessing I have about 1.5 cups of liquid left, so we're getting close. And I think we probably only have 5 to 7 minutes left before this rice is ready. And if you want at any point You know, you can go ahead and just grab a little bit on the edge of your spoon and taste it. Right now it's still, you know, al dente, a little too hard. You're just looking for a super nice, slight crunchiness as you bite into this, but a texture that you like. I tend to like a pretty soft rice. I don't want a lot of that crunchiness. And when I said that before, we're not talking crunchy like a chip crunchy. It's just a subtle texture to the rice where it's not mushy. And that's why you actually have to watch it so close. You don't want it to turn to mush or soup. And it's why we don't add all the liquid at once. You can certainly do it. You're just not going to get the best risotto that you can make if you do it that way. It tastes completely different. Had friends tell me that they make this, oh, I can make it in, you know, 20 minutes and I'm completely done. But what I've tried that before. I've tested all different ways to make this, and this method will develop the most flavor and make you fall in love with it. And I hope, like for my family, it becomes one of your children's favorite meals as well, or you know, one of your company, one of the meals you make when you have company over. Okay, so let me keep adding here. And I'm down to about a cup of liquid, and that's it. And because I can kind of eyeball this, that the liquid is getting absorbed, I'm probably going to end up using that whole 5 cups of chicken broth. There we go, and just keep stirring. You know, it's funny, I know that a lot of people have traditions when it comes to holiday meals, and I had mentioned that we tend to make this for the holidays. We found, you know, when we're sharing Thanksgiving with our family, we a lot of times stick to the traditional things like turkey. But at Christmas time, we started this tradition years ago because we realized we didn't really want turkey again. And we really didn't want ham again at Christmas time. And so we started to just experiment with new meals every Christmas. And this is how the scallop recipe developed. We fell in love with it, and you know, whether it's Easter tends to be scallops a lot of times, and we use it for Christmas, but we experiment at Christmas time. We don't always do scallops. But I thought I would throw that out there to you guys just in case you want to try it too, and really fix something that your family loves. Don't feel like you have to stick with tradition. It's okay to, you know, shake things up. I don't think that there's any right meal that you have to fix for the holidays. It's totally up to your family what you want to do. And it sure is fun to try new things. And especially recipes you know that they're going to love and that are special and maybe take a little bit more time, like this one. Okay, I've added, and now I'm down to about a half a cup of chicken broth. And you're going to see as more chicken broth is in here, more with the rice, it won't absorb quite as quickly. And that's going to be your clue that you're really close to finishing. We'll look at our timer here. It looks like about 3 more minutes, and then I'll taste test it and see where we are. So just give it some time. Make sure you are any rice that's popping up on the sides, go ahead and scrape that down. And see, we haven't moved really from this spot this whole time. So we're right here with this, paying close attention. And what you can do too is we're going to be using that parsley. So go ahead and grab, you know, a handful here. And you're just going to want maybe 2 tablespoons. So you guys know I'll tend to either use scissors or I'll cut off the top. I'm just pulling on it. And if you start to hear that rice boil up, go ahead and give it a stir. Good, and so all my liquid is absorbed. And I'm going to use this last ladleful. There we go. And stir that around. And then you guys, with parsley tends to have a lot of stems on it, but you want to just pick the leaves off. So while we're waiting here for this, you can quickly just pick off the ends. And because we don't really want these long stems when we go to bite into our risotto. But again, as soon as you hear this start to boil, go ahead and stir it around. Make sure you're getting the bottom so nothing burns. And then you can quickly go back to pinching off your parsley and getting that all ready. And I'm gonna say about, like I said, 2 tablespoons of parsley. And again, when you hear the sound of the risotto boiling, give it a stir and just keep going back and forth. Again, try to avoid any long stems of the parsley. There we go. And I just think it's so fun to listen to your food. It's another piece of cooking, is learning to listen. And it just makes you a better cook in the long run too, because you'll just know certain sounds as well as certain smells as they're developing. And there goes our timer. So you can grab a spoon and just give it a quick taste. Absolutely delicious. It's got just a little bit of bite to it right now, so I'm super close to finishing this. So now that I'm super close, I'm going to grab that 1/2 cup of wine. So we already measured that out. And when all the liquid on this last round of chicken broth is gone, then you're going to add in the white wine. And you guys, I know I keep saying it, but the smell of this is just incredible. It is something special for sure. And you know, you're just stirring pretty frequently, and we're just waiting for that rice to turn that perfect tenderness that you like. Everyone's different, just like with pasta, how much they cook it. All right, and my liquid is absorbed here. And we're gonna add in the white wine. And we're gonna cook that off. So we're probably adding an additional 5 minutes to this of cook time. So you're looking at 25 minutes once you start adding the chicken broth to this. And it's super important that you don't want cold cheese to be added to this or cold chicken broth. That's why we're warming it up. You want all of these ingredients to be around the same temperature. And that makes a big difference to it as well. And just keep stirring. You can even take a little bite and see where you are texture-wise. I can just see the liquid still of that wine, and so it hasn't quite cooked off, and this part is important with the wine. Delicious. And so as this cooks down, now we're going to add a little bit more of that butter to it. So again, we're just slowly developing and pulling out all these various flavors and adding to this. So you can even turn up your heat just a hair if you see that it's not, if it's taking more than a couple of minutes to burn off that liquid. But again, not too high, it's a medium-high heat. And you're gonna see it's gonna start to turn creamy. And you'll hear it as you turn your spoon. And you can hear the heat hitting it and that liquid being drawn. And basically what will happen is the rice can no longer absorb some of the liquid. And so that's when you'll start to see it turn creamy. And as you stir it, you'll hear that sound of liquid. And you'll know you're right at about that spot where you're finished. So let's go ahead and add in 2 tablespoons of that butter. And we'll stir that around. There we go. And you'll just see that butter melt all throughout the rice. And it adds just a subtle yellow, hint of yellow to the rice. And you just keep stirring until that butter is completely melted. And because we turned our heat up just a little bit, you'll see that it melts super quickly. And it's completely up to you whether you want to finish adding the remaining 4 tablespoons of butter. If you don't want to add it, that's fine. If you do, I would just suggest that you put it into slices as opposed to putting in the whole stick. And that helps it melt. So we'll just take each little pat of butter and add that in. And there we finished up our 1 stick of butter. And we have our parsley all ready to go. And just go ahead and lift it up and just make sure there's not too long of stems anywhere. Because like I said, that's no fun to eat. And it literally just took a second, and I'll just show you guys what 2 tablespoons looks like. Set that off. And give this a stir, and you guys can hear it, that it needed that stir. Nice. And then I'm just going to turn down my heat to low in this last spot. And just stirring it around until you see that the butter, melted butter, is fully incorporated into this. And then what you're going to want to do is grab that Parmesan and leave maybe a tablespoon of it. And just add that in. And this last little bit is just to dust the top with it. Oh, you guys, once you add the Parmesan cheese, you'll see the creaminess of this dish and why people love it so much. Oh my goodness, looks amazing. And like I said, as soon as you start to see the liquids not absorbing, that's really your true test, or that's your, that is the identifier for when you know it's close to being done. Absolutely amazing. You'll taste it right there. You might see that it needs some salt and pepper, so I'll grab that. And I'm I'm just gonna give it a sprinkle of pepper and then a sprinkle of kosher salt. And again, you know, I talk about this, but just in case you haven't seen my other share classes, kosher salt is mild. It's not like iodized salt. So I highly recommend you use kosher instead of iodized. And then make sure that heat is on low. And then grab a serving dish and take this risotto and gently begin to place it into your dish. You guys can see how super duper creamy this is, and just a whole lot of deliciousness. I mean, I know why this is my daughter's favorite meal. It is just, it's decadent and divine, and it's something you don't eat fast either, because you really do, the texture, you kind of just have to slowly eat it because it's super rich with all that butter and Parmesan. The white wine that's cooked off of it just gives it that flavor, punch of flavor. And then you're gonna grab that parsley and just sprinkle it across the top. Just like this. And fresh parsley just has such a nice earthy flavor to it. So I think that component is a true secret to this. You wouldn't think it would add much of anything, but then take that Parmesan and just sprinkle it. That leftover tablespoon, grab it and sprinkle it over the top everywhere. And I'll just show you guys again what this looks like. It's beautiful. I'm gonna take a little spoonful here on the corner. Oh my gosh, the best. I love this. Absolutely love this. And I truly, along with the scallops that we're gonna teach you next week, you really are gonna think you're at a high-end restaurant. You will fall in love with this dish. So give it a try. You guys always reach out and ask questions. sharinglifeloveandfood@gmail.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at sharinglifeloveandfood.com. We post occasionally, not all that often. We just try to inspire you every now and again to try things. But I hope you will try risotto and it becomes one of your special recipes that you have for company or for the holidays. So I truly hope you enjoy this, and so stay tuned for the next class when we teach you how to make scallops super, super easy. Thanks, you guys. Have a great day.